Taurus woman and Scorpio man. The axis of possession, pleasure, and transformation. A symbolic reading through the sun, Mercury, and moon. There's a kind of connection that doesn't ask permission. It just walks into the room. It's magnetic before it's logical, it's body before it's words. That's usually how it starts between a Taurus woman and a Scorpio man. Two fixed signs, two heavyweights of the Zodiac, who together form what tradition calls the axis of possession. The axis that runs from I have, Taurus, to I transform what I possess, or it consumes me, Scorpio. It's no coincidence this pairing keeps coming up in any conversation about soulmates and twin flames. The kind of bond women often describe as different from anything I've ever felt. And the kind of man who gets labeled equal parts irresistible and emotionally unavailable. It's also no coincidence that, alongside that intensity, come the classic red flags. Jealousy, control, silences that last for days. Neither one willing to be the first to say, I was wrong. This pair carries, at the same time, some of the Zodiac's greatest potential for deep intimacy and its greatest risk of codependency. But, as already noted in the previous episode of this series, none of this is decided by the sun alone. You also have to look at Mercury, the mind that either negotiates or blocks communication, and the moon, the emotional body that reveals whether all that intensity turns into healing or into a repeated toxic pattern. Let's open up this dynamic layer by layer. Her archetype, the Taurus woman, and the cult of what is real. The Taurus woman belongs to fixed earth, ruled by Venus, not the goddess of fleeting passion, but of pleasure you can touch, smell, keep. By nature, she's a densifier. She takes something abstract, a feeling, a desire, and wants to turn it into something tangible. A home, a routine, a body she knows by heart, a relationship with clear edges, with none of the ambiguity of a situationship. Psychologically, she's often read as the stable partner, the classic green flag of every popular compatibility list. Consistent, loyal, nurturing, sensory, patient. But behind that stability lives a shadow that doesn't get talked about enough. Attachment to possession. Venus in Taurus doesn't just love. She wants to keep. And when the object of desire is someone as intense and shifting as a Scorpio man, Taurus faces her greatest existential test. Learning that loving someone isn't the same as owning them. His archetype, the Scorpio man and the power of transformation. The Scorpio man belongs to fixed water, traditionally ruled by Mars, and in modern astrology also by Pluto, the god of the underworld, of symbolic death, of regeneration. He doesn't flirt with the surface. Without needing to say it out loud, he's always asking, can you handle seeing who I really am, in the dark, with no filter? He's the man pop culture loves to describe as too intense for anyone who isn't ready. The bad boy energy wrapped around a well of feeling most people never get close enough to see. And there's truth in that, but also a cliche that oversimplifies something deeper. His intensity isn't drama for drama's sake. It's an instinctive refusal of anything shallow. He tests, observes, keeps secrets, and only hands over his trust after moving through layers of guardedness. Because, archetypally, he knows what it means to die a little with every emotional surrender and come out the other side transformed. It's magnetism, but it's also vigilance. It's fixed water. He feels everything, but doesn't let it spill out easily. The encounter, densification and dilution of matter. Here's the most beautiful philosophical key to this pairing, and the one least talked about. Taurus and Scorpio symbolically represent two opposite, complementary movements of matter: densification and dilution. Taurus is the principle that solidifies. She takes desire and turns it into a body, a possession, something that can be stored in life's closet. Scorpio is the principle that dissolves. He takes what's already solid, including his own ego, and pulls it back into the cauldron so it can become something else. One builds castles, the other knows that every castle, one day, has to fall so something truer can take its place. When this connection works, it's revolutionary. She gives him ground to land his intensity on without losing himself. He gives her access to layers of herself she'd never reach alone, stuck in her sensory comfort zone. When it doesn't work, it turns into a tug of war. Her trying to pin down something that is, by nature, fluid and ever-changing. Him feeling caged by someone who confuses love with inventory control. Attachment and detachment, the real battleground. If there's one theme that sums up this pair psychologically, it's the axis of attachment versus detachment. Taurus is terrified of losing what she's built. Her identity is tangled up with what she possesses, including the people she loves. The Scorpio man, meanwhile, as much as he also craves depth and permanence, carries at some level a wisdom, sometimes a painful one, that whatever you cling to too tightly ends up suffocating, and whatever suffocates eventually dies. This explains why this couple, when they fall into the toxic version of the pattern, falls hard. She turns possessive, he turns evasive or vindictive. She demands predictability, he punishes with silence or emotional disappearance. It's the classic script people talk about today under anxious avoidant trap. Except here, ironically, the two can swap roles. Sometimes it's her, anxious, afraid of losing the object of her love. Sometimes it's him, pulling away to test whether the bond can withstand it. But with awareness, and that's always what this series is really about, Taurus's attachment becomes roots, not chains. And Scorpio's detachment becomes depth, not flight. That's when the axis becomes what the myth always promised: raw desire transmuted into a sacred bond. Mercury, the mind that either brings them closer or stalls the conversation. Worth remembering the technical rule: Mercury never strays more than one sign away from the sun. So her Mercury can only fall in Aries, Taurus, or Gemini. His only in Libra, Scorpio, or Sagittarius. In emotional practice, that means if her Mercury is in Taurus, a concrete mind, slow-moving, needing physical proof of what it feels, and his is in Scorpio, a mind that analyzes, doubts, reads between the lines. Their conversations tend to be dense, full of unspoken meaning. The kind of communication that happens more in a look and a silence than in words. It works, but it requires that neither of them use silence as a weapon. If her Mercury falls in Gemini and his in Libra, both land in air, and, interestingly, their minds end up doing the work their fixed bodies can't. Easing tension with humor, negotiating, saying out loud what they feel before it turns into built-up resentment. It's almost a relief from the weight carried by the sun and moon. Moon, the real thermometer of intimacy. And once again, the moon is what really runs the show day to day. In the grumpy good morning, in the way each of them asks for comfort without asking, in how they react to jealousy, to silence, to absence. If both moons fall in earth or water, the bond tends to have that kind of intimacy pop culture calls a safe space. She feels his intensity as something she can hold, not fear. He feels her stability as an embrace, not a cage. If either moon falls in air, the risk is that one of them ends up feeling emotionally alone. The water moon asking for depth, the air moon offering rational distance. And if either falls in fire, the pattern tends to be explosions followed by withdrawal. Intense fights, even more intense makeups. A cycle that's as addictive as it is exhausting. Taurus and Scorpio isn't about working out or not working out. It's about two archetypes learning, through each other, how to handle the raw material of life. What to hold on to, what to release, what to transform. She teaches him that it's possible to have roots without losing his soul. He teaches her that it's possible to transform without losing her ground. In the end, this isn't just a pair of signs. It's a living metaphor for what it means to love without suffocating, and to surrender without dissolving. And that, whether or not you believe in astrology, is one of the most human lessons there is.